Going to get started. We're inviting folks. We have 2 questions that we're going to put in the chat. And so we're going to be inviting folks to let us know where they're calling from or where they're dialing in from. And also, what is it that you are hoping to hear or learn from over the next hour or so. So if folks want to take a stab at answering that information, we're going to be monitoring the chat. And as I said, we're going to get started in just a minute or two. Welcome, everybody. I'll invite everyone to answer the question that Dylan put in the chat. Where is everyone from, and what are you hoping to get out of this evening's conversation? Thanks, Robert. Okay, so everybody was here on time, and if anyone is familiar with Volunteer New York, you know that we like to start on time and end on time. And so with that said, I'm going to kick us off this evening. Good evening. My name is Jeanette Gisbert. I am the proud executive director of Volunteer New York, and I am delighted to be here this evening to welcome each of you to this, our first inaugural, I guess you could say, community conversation on volunteerism. For those of you who may not know about Volunteer New York, I wanted to share a brief overview about who we are before we get started. Volunteer New York is a local nonprofit organization. Our mission is to mobilize our community to address its greatest challenges. We envision a community that is vibrant, resilient, and equitable, and believe that volunteerism and civic engagement are critical strategies to achieving this vision. Our work at Volunteer New York is firmly grounded in our values and our beliefs, and we hope that these values and beliefs will emerge throughout this evening's conversation. We value community and we value volunteerism, and we believe that everyone can serve, that volunteering is transformational, and that relationships matter. Last year, Volunteer New York inspired over 35,000 volunteers who contributed 445,000 hours of service to support more than 300 local nonprofit organizations in the communities that we serve, which are Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam counties. At the core of Volunteer New York's work is our belief in the transformative power of people to make a positive change. And so in honor of Men's Health Month, which is June, we thought it would be fun to invite 2 individuals who've made a positive change in our community at Volunteer New York to have a conversation about men's volunteerism and why it matters. And so with that, I am delighted to introduce Mark Rollins and David Severance. Mark is Volunteer New York's former board chair and now esteemed author, I love being able to say that, of The Evolving Man, Life Virtues Men Don't Talk About. And David is our gifted facilitator of Volunteer New York's leadership signature leadership program, Leadership Westchester. Together, incorporating excerpts from Mark's new book, they will lead us in conversation about volunteerism, service, relationships, legacy, and much more. And so I look forward to this evening's conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor to Mark and David. Please take it away.
Thanks very much, Jeanette. Good evening, everyone. So nice to have you with us here tonight. My name is David Severance. I'm here with Mark Rollins. As Jeanette said, Mark is a longtime volunteer serving Volunteer New York and many other organizations locally. He grew up locally in Westchester and has lived his whole life here practically, raised his family here, had a 38-year business career leading a local insurance business. And when he retired in 2018, he created a new endeavor called Retirement Transformed, a business designed to help people thrive in the third chapter or third phase of their lives. He does that work with his wife, Jody. They have a YouTube channel, so check it out after we're done here tonight. Retirement Transformed. You'll see Mark and Jody, a whole bunch of videos, fantastic information there for folks who want to create a retirement transformed. Along the way, Mark's been this great contributor to the work of so many organizations locally and as far abroad as Nicaragua and the Dominican Republic. We'll talk a little bit about his experience and life of service, together with the rest of things that have been part of his life up to now and maybe where he's headed a little bit. And Jeanette mentioned the book he just read. We may take a little piece or two out of that book, especially as it relates to volunteering or service to community. My name is David Severance, delighted to be here with you. And so let's get started. So Mark, I wanted to just say a couple of things. I wanted to hear a couple of things from you first about your early life. If you could just give us a sense of where you started from. What was your childhood like long before we get to your adult life as a volunteer and looking at these types of topics we'll be discussing tonight?
Well, before we do that, I just want to go on record that if you outlive me, I would like you to speak at my funeral. Oh, thank you for those kind words. That was awesome. I did grow up in a household in Mamaroneck, New York, and volunteering was at the core of my mom and dad's life. My dad was a businessman in Bronxville, New York, the Rollins Insurance Agency, and he was involved in Rotary Club and Lions Club. I remember as a kid going to the Christmas tree sale for the Lions Club, and it was freezing cold, and there was a fire burning in the 55-gallon drum, and there was all this energy around it. And I remember my mom, she volunteered in the Junior League in Larchmont and volunteered in their store. And she also volunteered at United Hospital that doesn't exist anymore. And she was what was called back then a candy striper. So she would just bring food and books and things to people in the hospital. But it wasn't bragged about. It wasn't drilled into us that we needed to do that. But my parents both had a slogan or a motto that said, you need to work hard, you need to play hard, and you need to help those who are less fortunate than you. And that was just ingrained in me at a very young age. And I saw my parents in action. So, the saying, action speaks louder than words. So that's what it was like growing up.
Got it. Thank you. By the way, I forgot to mention that as this is a community conversation, we would love to get people's questions. If you have a question that comes up anytime along the conversation, please drop it in the chat and we'll pick a couple of them up and extend the conversation in that way. Speaking of your parents, Mark, reminds me, my experience was a little similar growing up. My folks did a lot of things. They were active in a church. My mother was on the school board for a while, which was a little embarrassing for me when she was president of the school board, because some of the teachers kept saying, oh, well, I work for your mother, that kind of a thing. Of course, that was the last thing I wanted. And she did some other stuff. She worked at Blythedale and some other places. In our particular family, it wasn't something that it was expected for us to do. There was no motto about serving others. But we saw that they were doing those things with their particular lives. In my case, it wasn't something that I paid much attention to, as I was more interested in sports and other activities growing up. But I can see how having that element in your life can prime you for something perhaps later on. When did you see yourself first thinking about giving of yourself or volunteering or contributing in some way?
It's a great question. I'm rolling through my mind right now, and really what comes up for me is my Eagle Scout project in Mamaroneck, where I actually had to do a volunteer project. And on my own, I had to pick it, I had to manage it, I had to run it, I had to do it. I had to get other people to help me. And I forget how many hours it was at the time, but that was my real first project. And I cleared out a cemetery in Mamaroneck near Bellows middle school, or on Carroll Avenue in Mamaroneck, between Carroll and Barry. There's a school there, and there's this cemetery tucked in there, and it was all these headstones and tombstones that you couldn't see. They were toppled over. And I think it took me, 3 or 4 Saturdays with a bunch of buddies cleaning it up. And I felt so great at the end. And I was probably 17 years old, 16 years old. And that was probably the first time I did something on my own from beginning to end.
And do you happen to remember your motivation for that at that time? I'm curious because, was it you were just trying to get the badge, or was it you kind of you felt something else in that that was the motivator to do it, or what?
Well, it was definitely the badge.
Hmm.
That's what, made it happen. But I like to clean. I like to make things look better. I like to build things. I was always a model builder, and I still like to build businesses and things. And I found I got excited about making that transformation and that change for the family members of the people who were buried there. And there was, there was newspaper article and things like that. So I, I think it stuck with me. I watched my parents do what they did, and now I actually had my own little project that I did, and it felt great. It still does to this day at 67. Whenever you volunteer or help, reach a hand out and help someone, it's just such a natural way to get the dopamine rushed in your body and just feel happy and great and grateful.
But it sounds like at that particular time for you, that was a little bit of a revelation. It was like a side effect that you weren't necessarily thinking about or going for, but you experienced it at that time nonetheless.
Yeah, I think so. What was your first volunteer experience?
I used to tutor kids in high school. I liked teaching. I was a pretty good student, and I liked doing that. And I knew other kids who really struggled with biology and some other things. And so that was something that I did.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was something that fit my schedule and fit my interests. And it wasn't a big time consuming thing for me, which was good because I played sports. So I was busy every afternoon, but somehow I squeezed that in a little bit. And that was something that's still stuck with me till today too. Leadership Westchester is a program where we're all exploring the topic of leadership, and so that learning space is still something that thrills me. You mentioned in the book something that was, I thought, very interesting. You were talking about compassion, and one of the things you said in the book was this: like listening, compassion can be learned, and it's a virtue that can make all the difference in the world to your happiness, your relationships, and your outlook on life. And I was curious when I read that, can you say a little bit more about compassion? Because, you say you went into the badge project, not necessarily out of a desire or driven by compassion, and yet you still feel good about what it is you did there. And you must have so many experiences later in life where compassion was more kind of center stage for you. I'm curious if you could say a little bit more about that idea of learning compassion.
Such an awesome question. And I have a great answer that just came to me. I don't think this is in the book, but when we were young kids, my parents would take us to New York City every year to see the tree at Christmas time. And I remember when we were coming out of Grand Central, my mom would always say, hold your brother's hand, hold her hand. I want you to stay close and whatever. As we're walking down the street, I remember seeing a cardboard box and a person's head sticking out and a shopping cart next to it. And I remember my mom saying, we really should cross the street here. And I don't really know why. So we did that. And over time, my mom and dad would say that, these folks who live on the street, you have to be careful. You could get hurt. And I said, okay. And then growing up, my brother and I in business spent a lot of time going to New York City together to see clients. And Chuck, Chuck did the opposite thing. My brother Chuck would go to the city a lot. He introduced me to the Midnight Run. He introduced me to a lot of things like that, where you go into the city and you feed people that live like that. So he took that fear that my mom had and turned it into helping others. He couldn't walk past a homeless person without stopping, bending down, having a conversation. He couldn't walk past a men's shelter without going in and giving them all the money he had in his pocket. And that was compassion at work, taking this energy of you have to be careful with these folks versus you have to help them, and you don't know why they're there, but they need help, otherwise they wouldn't be there, right? So that's my compassion story. And when you go through life with that type of open heart where you're compassionate for others, well, it's more fun, you feel more grateful, and you can make a difference.
Yep, got it. One of the things that Mark said a minute ago, he said he signed up for the call today because he was interested in how men in particular can be helpful as volunteers. So I'd like you to think a little more broadly over the course of all of your experience volunteering and the many different groups you've worked with and the men that you've seen along the way. What would you say in a general sense in regards to how men can be helpful as volunteers, just for somebody who's asking the question, how do I find a place for myself, or what could I do?
It's funny, a lot of people ask that question, looking for opportunities to volunteer. And I believe that men and women, but men have gifts that we have. We might not really even realize it, but you're either good at accounting, you're good at research, you're good at selling, you're good at marketing, you're good at being kind to others, you're good at asking questions. Whatever it is, your gift, your superpower, nonprofits need that. They need whatever it is you have that you can bring to the table. And there's this, I don't know if it's a stigma, but I know it's hard to start the process. Where do I go? What do I do? What do they really need? I don't know anybody. I'm kind of embarrassed. I don't like to speak in public. But you know what? Once you get into a nonprofit, and you can start with Volunteer New York for sure, because they can lead you down this path, you're hanging out with people that want to help other people. I mean, you are in the zone where you're hanging out with God's greatest people, because we're all in this to help the cause, to help the people we're serving, to help each other. So there's no judgment, there's no criticism. Yeah, there's a little bit of politics, but any organization's going to have that. But gosh, you're hanging out with great, fun people that want to move the organization forward. So it's really reflecting a little bit. I'm a big journaler. Like, what am I good at? What do I love to do? When am I at my happiest? What were the 5 greatest accomplishments in my career? What was I doing? That's your superpower. That's what you want to bring to a nonprofit.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same for me too. I see it as kind of a three-legged stool. Like, what do you like to do? What are you good at doing? Oh, there's the Zoom thing. That's right. I got to make sure I don't count with my thumb. What is it? What is your superpower, your strength, or your gift? What is it that you're interested in? What is it that you enjoy doing? And what's the vehicle that you can use to make that impact that you're looking for? And that vehicle could be a particular program. It could be a particular nonprofit. It could be the place where you place yourself to be able to express whatever it is, that talent or capability that you have. I've read some stats on men volunteering in the US, and one of the things I've read is that men tend to volunteer kind of like overweighted in the sports area as coaches. Lots of leagues in towns, lots of people. There's lots of great need for that. And I could understand that men who have an interest in sports or played sports in the past would have an interest in volunteering as a coach or a manager or something like that in some kind of a local sports league. But really, there's a need for men and volunteers of all sorts in every type of endeavor. And, it's interesting to me that sometimes we stop at our first interest and we never adventure beyond that to the many, many other ways that we might make a difference, that not just makes a difference to the world, but makes us feel good about what we're doing.
Yeah, it made me think of something as well. I don't think it's a good idea to make your first role volunteering doing something you really don't like to do, because you're probably not going to want to do it again. So I think you have to be a little selfish and go into it with open eyes, but say, this is what I'm really good at. Can I start here? And then work your way through. I don't like finance. I don't like big spreadsheets. So I never liked being on the finance committee, but sometimes I found myself on the finance committee. But I have a great gift. I can take 10 pages of numbers and I can tell you the 5 that really matter. So I'll help you with that. and then we'll do a dashboard for the organization because I can filter it all down. I think back at my brother when I used to show him a dashboard of our company, he wanted to see the 20 pages behind it. So everyone's different on how they do it, but I'd go in with what you really want to do. You want to paint the inside of a building for a family, just do it.
One of the mistakes that I've seen so many people make, at least it seems like a mistake to me, is that they allow somebody else to talk them into doing some kind of a volunteer thing.
Yeah.
And, I've seen many cases where somebody says, oh, join me on the board of such and such a nonprofit. And the person says, no, I don't know anything about nonprofits. I've never served on the board. And the person says, don't worry, it'll be fun. And so then the person joins the board, and then A, it's not fun, or B, I've heard of cases where the person who invited the friend onto the board stepped off of the board. And so now the person's on a board that he or she didn't have a particular interest in, only said yes because their friend was asking them. And now their friend isn't there. And so that doesn't serve the organization. It doesn't serve the individual, but it happens far too often. And so I feel like a big piece of finding the right volunteer opportunity, and it might not be the first thing you do, but is to look at yourself and ask yourself, what is it that I care about? And what is it that I'm able to do? And then you find what other people, where are the places that other people care about what I care about? And then go talk with them.
Picking the right organization because you have a passion for it, the cause, whatever it might be, is important. Secondly, I think the first thing to do is to, if this organization has events, go to a couple of their events, speak to someone, but get on a committee. Get on the committee that aligns with your gift, finance, marketing, sales. You'll start to meet some people and you will either feel engaged and get engaged and rise to the top. And before you know it, they're asking you to be on the board, which is great if that's what you want. And if you're retired and you have some time, that's wonderful because organizations need great board members. So that's a good entry point. Get to learn as much about the organization as you can. You can go on their website. But when you make that step, I'm telling you, you're walking into a wonderful world that is a win-win for you, for the organization, and the people that they serve.
Yeah, I'd like an opportunity to kind of just jump in really quick. I know we didn't script this part out, but there's been some conversation around board service. And I think that I just kind of would like an opportunity to kind of quickly elevate that volunteer opportunities come in all shapes and forms. And, David talked about the tutoring, and Mark talked about the cleanup, and we talked about board service. And so, and there's also variety when it comes to commitment. And so it could be, I think sometimes the thing that holds us back is fear and the unknown. And at the Volunteer New York database, which we've put the link in, Volunteer New York is here to help everyone find where they can harness their superpower in support of community. And that could look like a one-day cleanup to board service. And just to echo, Mark is really passionate about board service. It was really influential in helping us build a program that Volunteer New York still holds called Board Boot Camp, where we help individuals learn about what some of those responsibilities are of board service, so that we're demystifying some of these questions so that folks feel more comfortable taking the next step. So I just wanted to kind of elevate because board service is the ultimate volunteer role, and there's a whole continuum of how folks can get involved.
I love that. Thanks for jumping in and saying that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I always use the analogy that's like dating and marriage. If you're going to serve on the board of an organization, you're marrying that organization from my point of view. You're saying, I'm here to make a significant commitment. You can only get there after really knowing that that's the right place for you and being willing to make that commitment. But you can date very easily, as Jeanette was saying. You can do a 1 hour clean up a park or 2 hours clean up a beach. Every organization has a wide range of needs. And that's one of the wonderful things about volunteering is you can find something that fits your particular interests and time at one place or another. Mark, I'd like to kind of advance a little bit further than past your early years. As you got into adulthood and you kind of switched your life out of college into the business world, you were mixing with different kind of people, you were talking about different kinds of things. What role did volunteering or kind of commitment to service play for you in the earlier part of your professional career?
Well, it played a tremendous role. I worked in a family business for my father and alongside my brother, and it was very hard at times to be my authentic self because everyone was watching. So tended to, Dad, can I try this? Dad, can I try that? As I worked my way out into the community and volunteered and then got onto some junior boards because I was younger, I actually grew as a person and a business person and a human faster than I could have working under the guise of my dad. I was able to get out and learn from others. I mean, my first board, I was, I don't know, 23 years old, and I was sitting next to a 65-year-old person. But again, you're in this world of everyone's there to help everybody. So I had mentors my entire career outside of my family business. And I learned about business by volunteering and being on boards of organizations. I think I was on, I don't know, 10 or 12 boards, and I ultimately chaired most of them just because that's who I am. I'm an entrepreneur at heart and I like to build things. But it, without that, without that influence, there's no way I would be who I am today, without a doubt, 100%. The book wouldn't have been written. I wouldn't have been as successful as I was in business. No way would I have started a YouTube channel. I just had this confidence that built because I was able to make mistakes without my dad watching, but someone else mentoring me and coaching me and saying, hey, that you made a mistake, which is fine. Try it this way. So it was huge for me. So if anyone's on here who's, under 30 or under 40 and you haven't served, you haven't volunteered, you need to do that. But again, we keep going back to board service, but volunteer in one way or another. You're going to meet the greatest people.
I've always felt that two of the big opportunities that volunteering offers you, one is the opportunity to learn, because suddenly you're with people who know a whole lot about a lot of things that may not be in your typical world. Wherever it is you spend most of your time, chances are you might be volunteering in a different kind of a circle. So there's an opportunity to learn and grow. Secondly, it's a backdoor to relationships. You have certain relationships in your professional career or whatever it is you do on your 9 to 5. And chances are the people that you come into contact with volunteering, no matter how extensive or limited it is, you put yourself together with a whole bunch of other folks that you might not ever come across otherwise. And some of them you take a shine to, some of them take a shine to you, and who knows where it goes after that. I've always thought that was really useful. Let me ask you a question.
Hey, David, there's a question in there from Isabella.
Yeah, go ahead.
She said, good evening. I'm from Manhattan, New York. I'm here to learn how men who are facing mental challenges, how they can cope with it. And you mentioned a second ago, David, that's why I wanted to fit this in. It's hard being a human. I don't want to say it's harder being a man than a woman, but it's hard being a human. And if you are feeling lonely at all, and that's loneliness, chronic loneliness is one of the greatest risks that we all face. It's worse than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day or having severe heart disease, and it can lead to death. So when you start to volunteer, you immediately have a new community of people. And if you're vulnerable enough to share what some of the things you're going through, that's when relationships really open up. And all of a sudden now you're not feeling as alone as you used to be. So for men who are feeling, as Isabella said, some mental challenges, unless it's serious and you need some serious help, gosh, this community of people out there that you can connect with is incredibly helpful in so many ways.
That's one of the themes that came out to me so clearly in your book was the importance of relationship. You talk about it all the way through, your relationship with Jody, your relationship with all the other people you come in contact with, and changing relationships over different stages of your lives. It speaks to the social nature that we have as humans to be connected to something. And we see this in adolescence with people wanting to be into the in with the peer groups or to follow the crowd. And we see it in adulthood where people, want to follow fashion, for example. They just want to be connected to other people. But of course, there's a much deeper desire for a real relationship more than simply what are people wearing or what are the cool kids doing.
Right.
I'm curious if you've ever asked, I mean, I'm sure you've asked other men to volunteer before in your various causes and things that you've cared about. And I'm curious what kind of answers you've gotten from the ones who said, no, thank you. I mean, I'm thinking about what is it that makes men say no to an opportunity? And I'm curious if you've had any experience with that, what you heard.
I have had experience with that. And it's an interesting question because it just happened to me this past winter in Florida. I wanted to take 4 other men with me to volunteer for the day. I live on Marco Island in Florida, and we wanted to go to Naples. There's what's the organization that builds homes? Habitat. There's a Habitat, and they have a bunch of projects. I said, why don't we go up for a day and paint the inside of a house? And 2 of them said, no, I don't really want to do that. And I at first I was like, what? And then I thought, well, it's fine. And the other 3 said, yeah, we'll go. And we never scheduled it, but I really was taken aback by that answer. And you've inspired me to, when I get back this winter, is to really meet with them again and find out why, because I don't know. Is it, and it could just be that they weren't brought up like I was, and they've never volunteered before, and they felt awkward, and they have some fear, and I don't know. But
Well, I'd be really curious to hear from the people who are on the call. For anyone who's been asked to do something as a volunteer and you chose not to, or you just decided, no, not this time, can you just drop into the chat why it is that you said no at that particular time? And there's no judgment here or anything, just for all of our education. What is it that made it hard for you to say yes to an opportunity that came to you? If you can think of that, please put that into the chat.
I'm guilty of not saying no enough. I'm on the other spectrum, so I get myself in trouble all the time doing that. But it feels good to do it, so I'm addicted to serving others.
Yeah, there are definitely serial volunteers out there, and thank God for them because they do a lot for the world. But everybody is on that scale somewhere. You don't have to be way over here like Mark, who's going to say yes to everything. You could say yes to 1 out of every 10, and it still makes a difference, of course.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit more, Mark, about some of the most rewarding or the most valuable experiences you've had as a volunteer. What were you doing? Why does it stand out for you?
Well, it's in my book, and it's a chapter called "The Day My Heart Opened," and it was my first trip to Nicaragua. I went down with 20 students, 20 high school students, and 6 adults to build homes in a remote part of that country. And I had seen, growing up, I had seen poverty, as we call it, on a family vacation. You look out the window. We went to Jamaica, I think, or something like that, and you see the tin shacks. But again, my mom was trying to protect us from that, so we didn't really engage. But this trip, we engaged in a big way. We went to a community that had 100 homes that have lived in there for generations and generations. And these are legit tar paper and tin shacks with a dirt floor. And the most amazing part of it was the people that live in these conditions are grateful, they're kind, they're very religious, they believe in God. They believe God himself actually lifted us up from New York and brought us down there. There's television sets in the community, so they know how we live. So we spent a week down there living just like they do, sleeping on cots with mosquito nets, eating rice and beans 3 times a day, using an outhouse, using a bucket shower at the end of the night. And we built from the ground up a home for 2 families, side by side with the families that were going to move in. And without a doubt, for me, that has been the most impactful experience in my life. And it changed my life on that first trip. And it changed it so much, I was how old was I can't even remember. My 10th grade son, my son Jonathan, who was in the 10th grade, asked if we could do that in February instead of going skiing. And I said, no, of course not. I'm not going to go to a third world country. I mean, we could get killed. So I went, and I loved it so much. I went back 20 times over the next 10 years, and it was incredible. And I don't think I can ever replicate that. You know, I think about it a lot. Should I go back? But I'm still just as happy holding a door open for a person who's struggling with it.
Yep, got it. Well, that kind of speaks to kind of a service mindset. I've always thought that it would be good for the world if everybody spent some time of their life in a service job.
Yeah.
Waiter, waitress, insurance, could be anything, customer service in a retail store, having to consider what life is like for another human being and really think about it a little bit. And then think about how it is that you might contribute to something that they have a real need or a wish for. It reflects some of the heights that we can aspire to as human beings.
Yeah.
Obviously, there are other things that get in the way, but you said something in another chapter of the book about humility that also struck me, which was one of the best places to practice humility can be found in serving others. That's why I thought of this quote. Finding an organization that has opportunities to volunteer will give you a chance to help someone who really needs help. Think of serving in shelters or food banks, or even mentoring someone who could use some coaching to improve their life. So you're talking about having a sense of humility to recognize that you're not better than someone else, but that you are in a position to help make their life, make some kind of a difference in their life, even if it's just opening a door.
Yeah, I don't want this to come off like because I wrote a book or because I've been to Nicaragua or whatever, or I volunteer a lot, that I'm better than anyone else on this call. But what I will tell you is volunteering, even cleaning a cemetery, will change who you are. When I was down in Nicaragua that first time, and then I went back. Every time I went back, I actually brought business professionals from Westchester County, New York, on these trips. And the hardest part of the trip, hands down, was not being there and seeing the poverty, because these people, these kids, they love you, they hug you, they're grateful. The hardest part of the trip is coming back to our world, to walking into our house with a refrigerator full of food, being impatient because the hot water is taking a long time to come out of the shower. And it's all that stuff that we don't take for granted. I'm not going to judge anyone that does that, but we all turn the faucet and the hot water comes out. They don't have hot water. Sometimes they don't even have water, but it just gives you a sense of always finding time for caring for others that are less fortunate than you. And I think that's just so important.
Paul mentioned in the chat earlier that he was thinking of volunteering, but the process of registering to volunteer with that organization was a bit onerous, and so he didn't do it. And my experience, having worked with hundreds of nonprofits over the last 20 years as a coach, business coach, and leadership coach, is that there's so many different kinds of organizations, from large and national in scope and more structured and organized, down to the smallest, friends of such and such a park, which might have 3 volunteer people who kind of run the whole thing, and there's no procedures, there's no handbook, there's nothing. And so what I want to say to everybody is there are thousands of organizations out there doing things. And if one organization doesn't fit your interests or your needs or your way of doing something, there's hundreds of others. And Volunteer New York works with 400 or 500 different nonprofits. I mean, they have so many relationships with different organizations that if you go on the website and you start looking at what's there, you'll find organizations you've never heard of right in your own backyard. And they go from large and formal, which also has its place, obviously, down to very small and very informal.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because perhaps these men that said no had a bad experience.
Right.
And you can have a bad experience with anything in life, right? You can have a bad meal, you can have a bad relationship, you can have a bad experience volunteering. But that doesn't mean that you're never going to cook another meal or go out to eat or get into a new relationship. Try it again. I mean, it's it's not a dirty word. It's not a dirty job. It's a wonderful job. I mean, and if the organization, maybe you caught someone on a bad day, but pivot and try another organization, like David said. And Volunteer New York will shepherd you through the process. So that probably is not going to happen. You're going to get someplace where you want to be, and you're going to be received with open arms.
One thing I would add to that is when you think about the impact that you can make in our communities, so 72% of the volunteers that we have in our Volunteer New York database are women. And that statistic is kind of on trend with kind of national statistics about the percentage of men versus women who volunteer, usually in these formal settings. And so, and at the same time, we know that, so many of our volunteer opportunities in our database are unfilled, right?
Yeah.
Nonprofit organizations continue to post in our database because they're looking to amplify the need and for people power in support of their mission. And so, imagine if we could increase the percentage of volunteers in our database and connect those to these organizations, what kind of impact that would have on our ability to make positive change. Of course, as Mark and David said, on yourself as an individual, but for me, and this is my why, it's about community. And it's about creating communities where everybody has the opportunity to reach their full potential. And everyone on this call has an opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Jeanette. I'm curious, Mark, if you could tell us about an experience you've had volunteering that went in a completely different direction from what you expected, just as a surprise. And it could be a good surprise, could be maybe not a good surprise, but I'm curious when you think back of things that you've gotten into and things that really went in a totally different way, what that might look like.
I think it was, but I'll say this, my absolute best board experience was Volunteer New York, without a doubt, hands down. And it was Elisa Keston, who was the executive director, and I was trying to sell her insurance to the organization. And she wouldn't have any of that. She said, no, we can't put our insurance with you because we don't do business with board members. And I said, I'm not on the board. She said, well, you're going to be. So that was a positive experience that she pulled me in, and I absolutely loved it. And it was just before that, on another board, that I had my absolute worst experience, and it was so bad, it lingered for 3 years, and I finally had to resign. And I'm not a quitter, but it became unhealthy, the politics, the interaction with other board members, the executive director, and it was unhealthy for the board. It was unhealthy for me. So I said, I have to leave. So it's funny because I left there wounded, thinking I'm never doing this again. And that was my 10th board position. I said, I'm never doing this again. And then I met Elisa, and there you go. I had my best experience right after that.
Got it. I saw the sense of your desire to serve throughout the way that you happened to write the book. Can you just talk a little bit about why you had the desire to write this book in the first place?
The book, I think general, everyone has a book in them. But I think the book for me was a calling, from something and someone much bigger than me, that I needed to share some of the stories of my life to help people think about their own lives. And the book has 18 chapters, and each chapter is put together the same way. There's an introduction about the topic, very brief, whether it's first chapter is listening. I don't know if anyone here, and here's the book, by the way. It's called The Evolving Man, Life Virtues Men Don't Talk About. And the first chapter is listening. The second one is vulnerability. And if you can learn how to listen better, and if you can learn how to be vulnerable, those are two superpowers that will change your life and your relationships. But I call out listening. I tell a story from my life, a lesson on listening, either good or bad. And then there's 4 journaling questions. And when I was writing the book, I had 70 men that I was emailing and getting responses to those journaling questions. So there's an opportunity for you to journal, but there's also an opportunity to read the answers from the other men. So you almost can think of this book as a men's discussion group. So I call it out, I tell the story, you hear what the men have to say, and then the 4th part of each chapter is a challenge. 2 paragraphs, 1 paragraph a page, on how to become a better listener, how to learn how to be vulnerable. And I believe that men need, humans need all the help we can get to be better people, but I think men struggle more with some of the things that I talk about in the book than women do. We're just not as open. We're not as comfortable. We don't want to share. We don't want to seem weak. We don't want to expose ourselves. So we bottle it up. And with nowhere to go with that, you can get yourself in trouble. I don't know if anyone knows this. If we had more time, I'd play the game. But the highest percentage of people in the United States that have successful suicides is men over the age of 65. And this is Mental Health Awareness Month for men. That is a very serious statistic and a serious problem. So I think the book can help with that. I think if men read the book, do a little bit of the work, they can find a way perhaps out of some trouble they're in and a way into opening up a little bit and having healthier conversations with people.
Well, knowing you as I do, the book didn't surprise me at all because the book is a gift to people, just like your volunteering is a gift to people. In a sense, I could say you were volunteering yourself when you wrote the book and put it out there for any man to pick up and get some kind of a benefit from, just as much as if you're volunteering at a particular organization. Is there something else that you feel is a return for one's investment in volunteering that we haven't touched on so far? We talked earlier about being connected to community. I mentioned the opportunity to learn or build some new relationships. Is there something else from your experience that you feel like one can get or benefit from by choosing to have this in their life?
Well, when I think this happened in Nicaragua when I was down there. I went down the first time, and then I came back and I went through reentry and processed so much about myself and my family and what was important to me. But I also felt really good about what I did. And I had some guilt around that. Like, well, why should I get joy out of that? I mean, I was helping someone else. That's nice. But I said earlier, I'm addicted to volunteering. There's something that happens, and I think you have to let it happen. I think it's okay, and I got better at this. It's okay to feel good about helping someone. So selfishly, every time I help someone, I feel like a better human. So I think that's something that maybe we don't talk about or we don't encourage. I encourage it with everybody. I said, you'll have the best night's sleep you've ever had if you can, volunteer and do something, because there's, you don't expect anything in return, but that's the gift that you get.
Got it. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question here before we come to a close in a minute. Mark asks, any suggestions for organizations as to how they can encourage men to join or volunteer to make men feel more welcome? What would you say about that? If you've been exposed to so many different organizations, do you have a thought about that?
Any suggestions for organizations how they can encourage men to join? I think that have a men's coffee hour, to just say we want, kind of get a guest speaker to come in. I'll do it. You don't even have to ask me. And talk about volunteering and what it means. Men only, men need community, and perhaps that's one way to do it. Just hold a coffee or something after work and say, we just want to have a discussion, or do more of these. I mean, I love this. I could do this every night. Well, I couldn't do it every night. I'd get divorced, but just jumping onto something like this and listening to two men talk about how volunteering has changed their lives, I think is helpful.
Two things I would say is one, you need to go where the men are. And so, for example, I've been part of a couple of different churches, and each of those churches had men's Bible study groups.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's where a group of men are. And they're interested in looking through the Bible as men for whatever, perspective that offers. And there's opportunities for those folks. Secondly, if you think about, what men might be interested in doing, then you might be able to find some kind of a particular interest that they have. For example, like Rotary Club. I've been to a couple of Rotary Clubs. Some of them are all men. Not all,
Yep.
of course, but there are a couple that are a lot of men there. And they're already predisposed to giving because they're in the Rotary Club. And so there's an opportunity right there to catch people who have some kind of a mindset to give already. And so I think that there are definitely some ways and some places that you could get to find people who might be sympathetic to a message like that. Okay, I see it's about 7:25, and we told everyone that we would start on time and end on time. So please let me turn it back over to Jeanette for a minute.
Sure. So I just want to give anybody a final opportunity to ask any questions. I love this idea of a PSA campaign. Maybe one day we can get the ad council to support and approve that kind of outreach message. Really appreciate everyone's participation. I'm just looking to see.
So Jeanette, George's question, public service announcements, he said, by the way, this call is an example of what he's suggesting. So
Super.
kudos to you for pulling this off and suggesting it and being such a great thought leader in not only Westchester County, but broader than that on the issue of volunteering and how important it is, and this month, particularly for men.
We're really grateful. I mean, this is really only, if anybody needs an example of how powerful connections and relationships are, you've just experienced it, y'all, right? We've known Mark and David for a long time, and we were able to come together and brainstorm how we could create a space to have this really important conversation. And so thank you for that and for participating. So I think to wrap things up, I do want to echo what we've already shared, which is Volunteer New York is here to support you in your volunteer journey. We know that 44% of people say they don't volunteer because they don't know where to get started. And we, in our communities of Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland, we're here to help you. We're the solution to that issue. And also I would mention that, Volunteer New York is part of a global network of over 130 organizations across the world. So if you're calling from outside of that area, we can still potentially point you in the right direction as well. And I know that we also have some individuals that are representing nonprofit and community organizations. And so I just want to echo and lift up that Volunteer New York is here to help you as well, to amplify your needs, and to connect you to the people power that you need in order to accomplish your missions. And then I do want to just kind of make a final plug. I know that we've talked about the whole kind of continuum of the volunteer experience. And if you're looking to gain kind of more clarity about what your own personal mission is, Volunteer New York has a tool for that as well, and it is called Leadership Westchester. And David Severance is, as I mentioned, the facilitator of that program. It is a 9-month program where you join 19 other individuals in a journey that, again, will help you hopefully gain clarity about leading from within and what your values are and what your purpose is. And the reason that program lives at Volunteer New York is because it is our hope that people will use that clarity to make a difference. Because it is when individuals get off the sidelines and participate in their communities that we create vibrant, resilient, equitable communities, which is our vision. And so we are accepting applications for that right now. Natasha just put the link in the chat. And I hope that you will, I hope that you feel that this was a good use of your time. I hope that you will tell others that weren't here, that Volunteer New York is leading the way in this conversation and is a resource for each of you. I hope that we will be able to continue the conversation in the future. And look at that, 7:27. I think as we like to say at our Volunteer Spirit Awards, that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you,
listening.
everybody.
It was great to be here. Really enjoyed it.
Good night, everyone. See you at the next one.
Good night.
Night.